Gracias por estar esta noche en el webinar que organizamos desde IEEE Colombia en el capítulo en la Sociedad Técnica de PES, Power Engineer and Energy Systems. El IEEE ha tenido la oportunidad en esta ocasión de invitar a un conferencista muy reconocido, el doctor Henry Louis, que en unos minutos paso a presentar. Primero queremos, antes que nada, darles obviamente el agradecimiento por estar aquí. El nombre mío es Yuri López, soy senior member de IEEE, ya más de 20 años en la sociedad. Soy profesor en la Universidad Autónoma de Occidente en Cali, Colombia, y les quiero agradecer a todos su participación. Sé que tenemos participantes de diferentes partes de Latinoamérica. Primero queremos contarles un poco quiénes somos, que esto de IEEE, que para muchas personas puede ser un nombre nuevo, pero IEEE es una sociedad de muchísimos años y dentro de IEEE vamos a contarles a ustedes un poco qué hacemos, dónde estamos y quiénes somos. Es la sociedad técnica más grande del mundo, es una asociación de profesionales en el área de la tecnología. Movemos aquí, básicamente somos más de 422.000 miembros de 160 países, entre estudiantes y profesionales. 123.000 estudiantes de diferentes universidades, centros tecnológicos, centros de investigación, instituciones. Se realizan al año más de 1960 conferencias. Ampliamente unos conocimientos técnicos, porque el IEEE produce más de 4.5 millones de documentos técnicos al año, entre ellos investigación de alta calidad, investigación que está citada a nivel top, más de 200 journals y magazines dentro de los mejores niveles. Más de 1.300 normativas activas, estándares que son utilizados en diferentes partes de la industria eléctrica, electrónica y de toda la electrotécnica, desarrollado por más de 49 sociedades técnicas. Esta sociedad no es una sociedad técnica únicamente, sino que buscamos un impacto social aplicando y relacionándonos en el aporte hacia las políticas, desarrollando esfuerzos humanitarios globales, apoyando obviamente la educación a través de procesos de capacitación y certificación y buscando siempre ética en la tecnología. El IEEE, la membresía IEEE, ofrece acceso a innovación técnica, información top, información de último minuto, pudiéramos decir así, oportunidades de relacionamiento, networking opportunities con profesionales, ingenieros, profesores y expertos en en tu tema en particular a nivel mundial. Eso es lo que denominamos dentro del IEEE Networking. Y de verdad que es una de las herramientas más valiosas que tenemos, además de otros beneficios exclusivos para miembros, inclusive beneficios financieros. Esta es una sociedad que provee oportunidades a los miembros para conectarse con expertos y colegas a nivel local, y no solo a nivel local de su ciudad, de nuestra ciudad, sino regional, país, región y el mundo entero. ¿Cómo lo hace? A través de su membresía con diferentes capítulos, actividades técnicas, actividades de grupo, mesas de trabajo, el desarrollo de publicaciones, la educación, reuniones y la conformación de iniciativas. Todo esto se desarrolla en consejos técnicos, estándares, normas, comités técnicos y comités de coordinación alrededor de todo el mundo. Nosotros quiero hacer particularmente énfasis en que estamos en la región 9 dentro de las regiones que maneja el IEEE. Nosotros estamos en la región 9, que es Latinoamérica, en la cual cada país es una sección en donde existen 36 capítulos, 106 capítulos estudiantiles, que son grupos de las universidades, instituciones académicas, instituciones de educación superior, que pueden recibir muchísimos apoyos. Un ejemplo simple es para el desarrollo de actividades académicas, el IEEE puede enviarles dinero efectivo metálico para el desarrollo de actividades. Lo hemos hecho en varias instituciones y es un apoyo importante para el desarrollo de las mismas. El IEEE tiene una relación importante y mantiene contacto fuerte con la industria, y para ello siempre se busca que las compañías promuevan la membresía alrededor de sus digamos, entre sus empleados. Siempre hay muchísimas ventajas y para una compañía que tenga relación con una sociedad técnica como IEEE siempre le va a traer beneficios. Dentro de IEEE hay algunas iniciativas que de verdad son súper interesantes. Estamos hablando hoy en día de redes inteligentes y hay un grupo de expertos dedicados a analizar todo lo que son las smart grids que realizan reuniones periódicas. Este grupo de expertos es internacional y se está buscando proveer educación, realizar investigaciones y pensar en la innovación para avanzar en estas redes inteligentes. Pero el tema que vamos a ver hoy justamente busca generar beneficios, sobre todo de electricidad, en comunidades que a nivel internacional pueden ser denominadas village. Esta otra iniciativa IEEE Smart Village para empoderar comunidades aisladas, off-grid. Sobre eso nos van a hablar específicamente el día de hoy, entonces voy a pasar rápido. Hay muchísimas otras beneficios y obviamente no podemos pensar que esto es una sociedad solo masculina, sino que hay muchísimos apoyos. Y quiero llamar la atención aquí para las chicas que estén en el evento, en la conferencia de hoy, porque existen muy buenos apoyos económicos para adelantar sus procesos de educación, tanto a nivel de pregrado, posgrado. Muchas iniciativas, tenemos personas que las pueden guiar si desean alguna guía para ese desarrollo, como mujeres en ingeniería. Y algo que nos interesa mucho, una vez terminemos la carrera, poder obtener un empleo o, siendo profesionales, conseguir un mejor empleo, to find a new and better job. Esto lo encontré hoy en el IEEE Job Site, el sitio de empleo de IEEE, y estos aparecen solo en ingeniería 338 empleos con esta palabra. Este sale hace 12 días, este es justo el que estoy presentando allí. Y estos, hace 6 días, un ingeniero para el LabVIEW, y lo necesitan en el Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, Estados Unidos. Y hace 6 días en el área de potencia y energía eléctrica en California, para quienes estén muy interesados. A nivel industrial, a nivel académico, en las universidades, los docentes, los investigadores, somos gran parte dentro del IEEE, pero también significa que necesitamos reunirnos con otros académicos y se forman unas redes muy importantes, no solo de los profesionales que llevamos muchos años, sino también los jóvenes profesionales, en los que podemos desarrollar unos grupos muy interesantes. Y a nivel académico, la publicación de papers, la presentación de pósteres en conferencias nacionales e internacionales, el desarrollo de normativas y ese intercambio de ideas, inclusive, como vamos a presentar más adelante, el apoyo a desarrollo de políticas. Esto tiene que ir de la mano también del desarrollo de becas, scholarships, y dentro de la sociedad PES, Power and Energy Systems, que es la sociedad dentro de IEEE, Power and Energy Society, perdón, la sociedad dentro de IEEE, que es dentro de la cual estamos hoy haciendo este webinar, existe una beca muy interesante que impulsa el desarrollo de proyectos de maestría y doctorado interesados para que por favor visiten esta página web que está aquí y vean la información que necesitan y de pronto pueden recibir un apoyo bastante interesante. El IEEE, como muchos podemos saber, es una fuente y un apoyo enorme para el desarrollo de normativas, para estandarizar procesos. Solamente aquí coloqué la búsqueda por microgrids, microredes, y salen estas tres que podemos ver aquí a la derecha, pero hay 20 resultados de normativas, diseño, desarrollo, optimización, instalación, implementación, medición. Y de verdad que es una fuente muy importante para mantenerse técnicamente conectado y, como decimos muy coloquialmente, para estar en la jugada. Hay una diversidad enorme de profesionales siendo miembros de IEEE PES. Así que, pues bueno, yo creo que básicamente no quería demorarlos mucho en esta parte. Existen muchísimas conferencias alrededor del mundo. Esta fue una conferencia que hicimos aquí en Cali en el 2018 en el Hotel Intercontinental, pensada para la profundización, intercambio académico dentro de lo que es la Sociedad de Energía y Potencia, Power and Energy Society, PES. En esta región, pues estamos obviamente en región 9, como les comenté, IEEE Colombia. Pueden ver aquí tenemos el coordinador de la sesión de hoy. Ven el logo dentro de los participantes, IEEE Colombia. Y pues mi invitación es a que hagan parte de esta sociedad que, pues, uno de los beneficios es este tipo de actividades para mantenernos totalmente informados. Sobre la conferencia de hoy, entonces, eh, Off-Grid System for Energy Poverty Alleviation. Aquí trataremos, el doctor Henry Louis tratará los desafíos que presenta la pobreza energética en comunidades aisladas y nos va a presentar el papel que juegan las minirredes o microredes y otras soluciones off-grid para sistemas aislados para estos desarrollos. Además, se detallan los impulsores tecnológicos para las off-grid, junto a ejemplos de proyectos reales que ellos, desde Estados Unidos, han realizado en Zambia y Kenia. El doctor Henry Louis es doctor en Ingeniería Eléctrica de la Universidad de Washington, es profesor del Departamento de Ingeniería Eléctrica e Informática de la Universidad de Seattle. En 2015, él fue becario de Fulbright de la Universidad Copperbelt en Kitwe, Zambia. Actualmente es presidente y cofundador de Kilowatts for Humanity, una organización sin ánimo de lucro que brinda acceso a la electricidad en comunidades que no tienen acceso a esta red, comunidades aisladas, brindando oportunidades además comerciales en el África subsahariana. Entonces, vamos a hacer obviamente la presentación en inglés y a continuación voy a presentar y darle paso al profesor Henry Louis. Okay, everyone, thank you for being here and join us. It's my pleasure to introduce you guys Dr. Henry Louis, who is professor in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at Seattle University. Welcome, Dr. Louis, to the IEEE PES Colombia webinar of Grid Systems for Energy Poverty. We are very glad to have you here. Thank you for joining us, and okay, all yours, the audience. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Buenos tardes. I apologize that I am not able to give this presentation in Spanish. I took Spanish class, as many Americans do, but I took it maybe 25 or 30 years ago. So it's been a long time. Okay, so I am very excited to be able to present to you virtually. I think that is maybe one of the positives that have come out of the COVID pandemic that we are in, is that it's much easier and much more familiar now for all of us to get together online. And so I'm happy to be able to take advantage of that to present to you. So I'll be talking about off-grid systems for energy poverty alleviation. And my goal here is to introduce the main themes of energy poverty, what we mean by off-grid systems, the different technologies that are used, and some of the practical aspects of implementing these types of systems. I'll also, at the end, discuss some of my organization's actual installations that we have in different parts of Africa, and I believe we'll have time at the end for questions that you might have. Okay, so this is just my background. If you're interested in the organization that I work with in sub-Saharan Africa, the website is shown here. It's kilowattsforhumanity.org. If this is a topic that you're interested in and you are looking for more materials, you can go to my website, which is drhenrylouis.com, and you'll get access to lots of lecture slides that I have, and you'll also find information about how to get the book that I authored where some of this information comes from. Okay, so let's talk about off-grid systems. So an off-grid system provides local access to electricity from a system that's not connected to the national grid. And here are just some pictures and some examples of off-grid systems that I've personally been involved with, just so you have an idea of what they look like and about how big they are. So some of the off-grid systems that I've worked on have been hybrid systems, having both solar power and wind power, as shown up here. But many of them are just solar power, and really it can be difficult to find locations that are windy enough to support wind turbines. So most of them are just solar. So here are two examples of these types of systems. Here are some more. Up at the top, this is a system that was installed in a repurposed shipping container. So inside this, there is all the electrical equipment, but also a little store. In all of our installations that we do, we couple the technical electrical system with a business plan that allows the local community to make use of that electricity in a productive way. And I'll talk more about that in this presentation. Last year, we did another installation in Cheba, Zambia, and here you can see the solar panels up at the top. And this is a store where they sell groceries and frozen food and drinks, but there's also a couple of other businesses like a sewing business and a barber shop as well that's powered by this energy kiosk. And what you see here down at the bottom, you can see a lot of the kids from this off-grid village. What they're doing is they're watching a video that is being displayed on this white sheet. And you can maybe imagine how exciting it is to be able to see movies in your village. If you've never had electricity there, you may or may not have seen a television before, but now you get to have movies played for you at night. So it's a really exciting thing to see and be a part of. And then just a few months ago, despite COVID, we did our largest system yet, which is shown here. And basically, each one of these windows that you see in this building is a different business. And it ranges from grocery stores to hair salons to chicken incubators, offices. And so we really try to couple the electricity use with productive uses of that electricity. In addition to the solar panels that you see here, we also installed a solar pump in this community because they had struggled with resiliency to drought. Okay, so those are just a couple of examples of off-grid systems. So now we'll talk about energy poverty. A lot of people in the world aren't familiar with energy poverty and have never really thought about what it's like to not have adequate access to electricity or to other fuels. So when I say energy poverty, what I mean is not having access to modern fuels. Modern fuels being electricity or maybe methane or propane or what we would call natural gas. Those are all considered modern fuels. Instead, almost 3 billion people around the world rely on kerosene or charcoal or just wood to cook and to heat their homes with. So there's not quite 8 billion people on Earth, but we almost have 3 billion that still rely on solid biomass for heating and cooking. So that's not a majority of the people, but it's pretty close. In addition, almost a billion, in fact, 789 million is our best estimate, people do not have access to electricity. So these people do not have electricity in their homes, and they most likely do not have electricity in their communities. So this is a big problem affecting a large portion of the people on Earth. Now, if you happen to be energy impoverished, you're likely to consume low amounts of energy overall. You're likely to rely on your own muscles or that of animals to do mechanical tasks like tilling the earth or planting your crops and harvesting your crops. You might also spend a lot of time getting the fuel that you need, getting it, finding it, and processing it, cutting it, drying it, etc. Some studies have shown that a family might spend 20 hours a week. So somebody in that family is devoting 20 hours a week just getting the fuel that they need to survive. And that often is women or young girls that are doing that. And so you can imagine the lost opportunity for that child They're not able to study as much or go to school or socialize as much if they're spending 20 hours a week getting fuel. In addition, those people that don't have adequate access to modern fuels, they probably spend a lot of money on fuel. They might spend 10%, 20%, even 30% of their income on kerosene and charcoal and what have you. So it's very stifling. Energy is at the forefront of their mind, and they spend a lot of time and a lot of money making sure they have an adequate supply. So why we care about this can be summarized in this figure. So this figure shows the per person energy use on the x-axis and the Human Development Index on the y-axis. So I think we, being engineers, have an understanding of what per person energy use is, megawatt hours per person per year. But what about the Human Development Index? We might be less familiar with that. Well, the Human Development Index is a number, it's a metric that the United Nations came up with as a way of quantifying how well off a country is. And the number that you get is usually between 0 and 1, and it takes into consideration three factors, three things that most people would consider being essential for having a good life. And those three things are your health, essentially how long you live, your education, how much schooling did you have, and your wealth or income. How much money do you have? How much money do you earn? So as imperfect as a measure as that might be, nonetheless, it's useful because I think we would all argue it takes these three things to at least, you need to at least have these three things to maybe feel like you are capable of having a fulfilled life. So what we notice when we look at this figure is that countries that generally have more access to energy tend to reinvest it in ways that help their Human Development Index. So countries that consume a lot of energy generally have a quite high Human Development Index. On the other hand, countries that consume just a little have very, very low Human Development Indices. And so the idea here is if you look at this trend, we see that there's a high sensitivity to Human Development Index for energy use for countries that are down here. So South Sudan, Niger, Haiti, all the other countries that are down here, if they gained access and consumed just a little bit more energy, we would expect their Human Development Index to increase sharply. Whereas if you gave a country like the United States a little bit more energy, we probably would not invest it in any sort of meaningful way that improved our education, health, or income. So we want to target these countries down here and improve their access to energy. Countries like China, by the way, if we were to roll back and go back in time to the 1980s or 70s, China was somewhere down here, and they've been able to rapidly increase their energy consumption and improve their quality of life. And this is where, as best as I can tell, where Colombia is on this curve. So more or less at that knee point of the curve. So I already told you that about 800 million people don't have access to electricity. That in itself is a shocking number. But where do these people live? Well, they primarily live in sub-Saharan Africa, where there's about 600 million people without access to electricity. That's about twice the population of the United States. The remaining people live in South Asia and other parts of the world. I think in general, South America, Central America has high electricity access rates, but by no means is it necessarily universal at 100%. And even in the United States, there are places where we don't have grid connections for people's homes. And so even in more wealthy countries, there are still people that might not have access to electricity from the grid. So when we talk about access to electricity, the most common way of expressing that is known as the electrification rate. And the electrification rate is simply the population who live in a house that is connected to the national electric grid, divided by the total population. And so if we use that as our metric, we can see that the electrification rate has actually increased fairly steadily since, going back to at least the late 90s. And now it's somewhere in the 90%. And so that's good to see that improvement. But of course, this isn't the same for every country. Some countries have very, very high electrification rates, and some, as you can see on the right, have extremely low electrification rates. For example, Burundi and Chad, their electrification rate is just slightly over 10%. Okay, so maybe one out of 9 or 1 out of 8 people in that country have access to electricity at the home. Now, a problem with quantifying access to electricity using the electrification rate is that just because you have power lines to your house does not mean that that is a high quality connection. Maybe there's load shedding that frequently occurs. This was the case when I lived in Zambia, where about 8 hours every day we didn't have electricity. They load shedded us. So we would technically count as having access to electricity, even though we didn't have it for about a third of the day. The electrification rate also doesn't account for how expensive the electricity is, or how safe the electricity access is. It just simply looks to see if you have power lines going into your house. But nonetheless, it is a metric that we commonly use. So looking more at electricity consumption, we see that electricity consumption per person has increased by about 260% since the 1970s. And this is, again, per person. And if we account for the increase in population that has occurred since then our total electrical energy consumption has increased by over 500%. And so that's an incredible amount. And you can see that although it mostly increases from year to year, there are times when we see a dip, a decrease in the consumption. What do you think caused this decrease in consumption that occurred around 2008 and 2009? Anybody have any ideas?
Probably the using of LED lights on more efficient devices.
Okay, that's an idea. Any other thoughts? Think back to what was going on in 2008, 2009.
Some championship.
Good guess. Yeah. So in 2008 and 2009, many countries entered a recession where their economies contracted, including the United States, or especially the United States, but other countries as well. So worldwide, there was a slowdown in economic activity. And of course, other countries were affected differently. Maybe in Colombia, you were not affected as much. But this shows that when we have a healthy economy, we generally consume more electricity, more energy. And when we shut down our businesses and people are out of work, we consume less. And so there's this linkage between electricity use and the prosperity of our countries. So let's play a little game. I've shown on this slide 4 plots of per person electricity use going back to about 1970. And each one of these plots corresponds to either China, India, Sub-Saharan Africa as a whole, or the United States. So I want you to take a moment and try to match the region to the plot based on what we've talked about here or based upon what you know about these regions. Okay, so take a moment, and I think we'll start with this plot up here in the upper right. Okay, so take a look at its characteristics, take a look at the y-axis scaling, and think, is this China? Is this India?
I think it's India.
Sub-Saharan Africa or the United States? And you can go ahead and chat it into the window if you would like.
Doctor, it would be
Chat.
India, maybe.
Okay, I hear some support for India. Why do you think it might be India?
Because it's growing, but it is not growing so fast as the other.
As this
as
one.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's very good. Yeah. So this looks like India. So if this is not growing as fast as this one, or at least the scale is different, what country or region is this?
That will be China.
Okay, that will be China, and we think that's China because China has been installing all sorts of power plants, and we just seen them rapidly industrialize. Okay, so what about this one on the right, the bottom right?
United States.
And why do you think this is the United States?
Because of the amount of power.
Yeah, because it's quite high, right? It's 15 times as high as India and 4 or 5 times as high as China. Okay, and then what about this one then?
Sub-Saharan Africa.
Yeah. Process of elimination, sub-Saharan Africa. You also notice the scaling, right, is quite low. Okay, yeah. So very good. Congratulations if you got that right. Now let's look at the United States. In the United States, we've seen since the 1970s increases in consumption, and then it kind of tapered off, and it's actually decreasing now. So we know that in general, when we have a prospering economy, we use more and more energy. But what happened to the US then? The economy certainly has been growing since 2000. There's no doubt about that. But why does this curve not match China or India? Why does it taper off and actually start to decrease? Any ideas?
It could be efficiency in the use of energy.
Yeah, efficiency is probably a reason. We've made a big push in many parts of our country to use electricity more efficiently, to conserve electricity. What else do you think could?
Yeah, maybe because in that time the United States and all the factories to China.
It was a little bit hard to hear, but I think you might have talked about us offshoring some of our activities to other places like China and relying on other countries to do our manufacturing. I think that's right as well. When we move a factory or we close down a factory here and buy goods from somewhere else, we use less energy, and that other country then uses more. Yeah, so I think it's a combination of those things. So if we look at sub-Saharan Africa, their plot, although the scaling is different, kind of resembles the United States. It doesn't resemble India and China. So what does that say about sub-Saharan Africa? Does this mean that they are also adopting energy efficiency and are moving their manufacturing base to other countries? Or does it suggest something else is maybe happening? To me, it's not that these countries are investing in low energy appliances, LED lights, etc. But rather, it tells me there's been an underinvestment in their electrical infrastructure, because the population in many of these countries is growing extremely rapidly, 2% a year in some places. And so if you don't invest in your transmission lines, if you don't invest in your power plants, and your population increases, then your per person use goes down. So many countries in sub-Saharan Africa have really, really high, their electrification rates are really low, and you can see that in the data here. So that doesn't make us feel really good about the prospects of extending the grid to all these people that don't have it, because really the people that are connected to the grid, they're not consuming as much as they probably should be because of lack of investment in power plants. So let's look at these rural communities. After all, it's mostly rural communities that struggle with access to electricity. If you're in an urban area, you're far more likely to have access to electricity than in a rural area. So looking at these communities, you can take their energy needs and sort of split it into three segments: the energy that households need, the energy for community services, and the energy for productive uses. When we look at the typical rural off-grid household, if we look at their energy use, they typically will use 5 to 15 gigajoules per person per year, and most of that energy is for cooking, water heating, and space heating. You can compare this to the global average, which is closer to 80 gigajoules per person per year, and you can see that there's quite a deficit there. They'll also be using electricity, though, if they get access to it, for things like lighting and radios. But their primary use of energy is for heating and cooking. If we look at community services, the energy needs of community services, we're talking about the energy needs of health care facilities, of schools, of places of worship, outdoor lighting, etc. So these are our energy requirements for community services. If we look at what a school needs, a school that doesn't have access to electricity, when they get it, they'll probably use it for lighting, for internet, telecommunications and computers, or ITC, and advanced or enhanced teaching technologies like laptops, projectors, printers, and so forth. So that's the energy need of a school, electricity need of a school. For healthcare facilities, it's also lighting and ITC, but now refrigeration becomes important because vaccines and medicines often need to be in a temperature-controlled environment. And then, of course, there's diagnostic equipment. You need clean water and hot water, and of course, the electricity must be extremely reliable. This is a picture of a health post in Malawi, by the way. So this is what a typical health post in a rural area would look like. And then lastly, productive uses of electricity. These include things like using electricity to pump water for irrigation, to mill corn, to process forest or agricultural products, and then also appliances, small appliances that enable businesses like hair shavers or televisions, refrigerations, brick making, etc. This is a picture I took in Zambia. And inside this blue building, there is a machine that lets the local community process the corn that they grow, and it's more valuable if it's been milled through a machine like this. And so, instead of having to do it either manually or with a diesel-powered hammer mill, they can do it with electricity, and so it helps that local community thrive. So I've outlined a couple of needs for electricity in the community, and it's important to think about matching the technology that you use with the needs. And so I think it's important to think about the technologies that we offer as a continuum, not a one-size-fits-all solution. So on one end, we have solar lanterns, and these are very, very small devices that power just a few LED bulbs. Their solar panels are often less than 1 watt, so they're quite small. They have a battery. Some of them might be large enough to power a cell phone or recharge a cell phone, but certainly not all of them. So this would typically be used in households as an alternative to kerosene or candles. And the solar lanterns are usually quite inexpensive. Most families, though, want more. They want to have a television or a radio or multiple lights. And so if they're able to afford it, they might use a solar home system. So now that the solar panels are maybe 10 watts or maybe 100 watts, and they are capable of powering multiple lights, maybe some small appliances like a television or fans, and they provide a much better access to electricity. But they're not big enough to power refrigerators or freezers or any of those productive uses that I talked about. Now, to do that, you're going to need multiple panels. You need to be more or less in the kilowatt size to 10 kilowatt size systems. And so you might use what's called an energy kiosk, where there is some productive use that's closely coupled with the point of generation of the electricity. And then finally, we have mini grids. Mini grids are like the national grid, but installed in the rural communities. So they're not connected to the grid. You might have actual distribution lines that are have been erected, and it offers high quality electricity service, AC usually, and it is often more reliable than the grid itself in many of these countries. So you would do a mini grid if the community really has enough money and wealth and enough business opportunities to make use of that electricity. Some communities simply won't be able to afford it. So if you're trying to make money, you would only really want to be involved in those communities where you think that there's enough income to support a mini grid. So these different approaches have been very successful. There have been over 3 million off-grid solar lighting products, including solar home systems and solar lanterns, just in the 6-month period this year. So that's quite a bit. And appliances are being used now more and more. So there's millions of these units that have been installed and are out there. So quite successful in most markets there. Now, on the other end of it, the mini grids are much larger, and so we expect there to be fewer of them. But maybe there's 5,000 to 10,000 mini grids that are out there, and there's an opportunity for maybe many more. Some projections call for over 100 million households to be connected by mini grids. So that would be an incredible amount of mini grids. So the point here is that I think everyone sees the opportunity for these off-grid electrical systems to really change the lives of people in these rural areas, rather than waiting for the grid to come, which may never come, in all honesty. Okay, so that's sort of the lay of the land. That is describing energy poverty, the need for electricity access, why we're interested in electricity access, and a survey of some of the technologies that we use. Let's now talk about the system architectures, how we actually go about supplying access to electricity. So in most off-grid systems, you're going to have something that produces the electricity. Usually you'll have some sort of energy storage, but it depends upon what energy conversion technology you select. There's usually converters, controllers, and then, of course, the load. Now, if it's a big mini grid, you're also going to have a distribution system and meters in people's homes, but we're really not going to focus on that today. This is a schematic of a typical off-grid solar system. You have a PV module, or maybe you have multiple connected together. They're going to go through a charge controller before they connect to the DC bus. Connected also to the DC bus is a battery. Okay. We need the battery because sometimes the load is going to be greater than what the PV panel is going to produce. So especially at night, for example. And if we want to use an AC load, then we need to have an inverter. And the inverter just you're probably familiar with. It just converts the DC to AC. Now, the role of the charge controller is twofold. First and foremost, it's going to prevent the battery from being overcharged. So it's always going to be monitoring the battery's voltage, and it's going to make sure that the battery doesn't get overcharged, which will shorten its life, and it will more or less just make sure that the battery lifespan is prolonged as much as possible. The other thing that a charge controller does, and not all charge controllers do this, but many do, is it has a maximum power point tracking function where it tries to ensure that the PV module is operating at its maximum power point. In other words, it's able to decouple the voltage found at the DC bus from the operating point of the PV module, and it will try to optimize the power production from the PV module. Now, most inverters that we see in off-grid systems, they have an additional functionality known as a low voltage disconnect. So it's always monitoring the battery voltage, and when the battery voltage gets too low, it disconnects the load. And the purpose of that is to prevent the battery from being too deeply discharged. Now, there's lots of different combinations and possibilities in off-grid systems depending on what you're using. Here's one simple example of a hybrid system where we've used a PV module and a generator set. And this one is using a transfer switch, letting you power it either from the PV side or the generator side. And there's many, many other ways of doing this. This is just one example. Let's now briefly talk about the energy conversion technologies that we see in off-grid systems. We'll see either generator sets, which are powered by fossil fuels or maybe a biofuel. We see PV arrays, you see some wind turbines, and you also see hydro turbines. Now, from time to time, I get asked, what about geothermal? And I'll ask you that. How come we don't see geothermal electricity used in off-grid systems? Any ideas?
In our geography, you're too expensive and too big for isolated regions.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. For one thing, geothermal requires a very specific geology, and just there's not that many places that are going to be able to support that. But also the order of magnitude or the scale of a geothermal plant would be at least in the megawatts, and that's far bigger than what any of these mini grids typically are today. A typical mini grid is in the tens of kilowatts to maybe 100 kilowatts, not megawatts. Yeah. So these are the four that you typically see. And I've included here just some pictures of what each one might look like in the field. So I think PV modules you're probably quite familiar with. Maybe you're familiar with wind turbines as well. These are usually small wind turbines. The gensets can be quite small, maybe a few hundred watts to even hundreds of thousands of watts. And the micro hydropower, I think these are really interesting because the type of turbine that you ultimately select and design really depends upon the water resource. So you might end up with some very different looking turbines depending upon the water resource that you have. But by far the most common energy source that we see is solar. And we see that for a couple of reasons. One is that in places that struggle with access to electricity, it's often really sunny there. Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, lots of sun. We also know if it's going to be sunny or not there, or what the solar resource is on average over the course of the year. It's hard to know that about how windy it will be. It's hard to know that perhaps about the stream or river in which you would use a microhydro. You pretty much have to go there and measure these values. Whereas with PV, you can look up a database online from the comfort of your home and get a really good idea of how sunny it is and what the solar resource is like there. So I now have a couple of pictures of what some of these systems look like. This is a hybrid system that makes use of wind and solar. And here are the different controllers and converters here. So this is the inverter, which converts the DC from the batteries, which are on the floor, you can't see them, to AC. We have 2 PV arrays, each with their own charge controller, so they're shown up here. We also have 2 wind turbines in this system, and wind turbines natively output AC, so you need to rectify it to DC to connect it to the battery. Now, a wind turbine in an off-grid system doesn't need a maximum power point tracker or a charge controller, but what it does need is a diversion load controller. And the diversion load connects these resistive elements to the battery, and it will turn on if it's really windy and the batteries are almost full. And if you're interested in that, you can ask me a question as we finish, and I could talk about wind system control in more detail if you'd like. Here are just some other examples of what is inside the powerhouse of these mini grids. So the one on the left is a very, very large system, tens of kilowatts in size with multiple inverters and charge controllers. The one on the upper right is maybe just a few hundred watts in size, and this one powers a school. Right? So depending on what size and what the application is, your components might be very, very large or very small. There are lots of different batteries that you might use in your system, and here's just an example of a couple of them. So up on the upper left is a flooded lead acid battery, where you have access to the electrolyte and you have to periodically recharge or refill it with water. In the upper right is a very, very large battery bank, and these are sealed lead acid, and each one of these is, I think, about 2 volts and maybe 1,000 amp hours. So a very, most of them are connected in series, as you might be able to tell. The big, big battery bank. And at the bottom is a lithium ion system. This is actually one that we just installed a few months ago. And like any lithium ion system, you have to have a battery management system that prevents them from getting too hot or being charged unevenly. So this is what a typical lithium ion system would look like. Okay. Now I'll transition into talking about implementing a system. So maybe this is an area that you see yourself being involved in, or maybe you've done a couple of projects. I'm going to kind of outline the steps that you might take to doing off-grid systems. And it really can be broken down into 8 steps, so the 8 stages of an off-grid system. So the first thing that you do is you have to figure out which community you want to work in. And by and large, how successful your off-grid project will be depends on where you put it. So you need to know what the community is like. Is it going to be successful? Does it meet your goals as an organization? And if you're involved in a community or in a country, there's probably thousands or tens of thousands of villages that don't have access to electricity. So you need to quickly screen them or filter them down to the small number that you're actually going to seriously consider. So there are multiple ways of doing this, but more and more what we're seeing are online tools like this one. This is Electrification Pathways, where you can combine aggregate demographic information, resource availability information, and it will tell you which community, based upon some of your decision criteria, would fit. And from that, you would create a short list of communities that you might be involved in. Now, there's of course other reasons why you might select a community. Maybe you know somebody from that community, or you're working with an organization that is also involved in that community and you're familiar with it. But in general, you would start by prospecting and screening. And then we get into site assessment. So now you have a handful of communities that meet your basic conditions of maybe the population density, the distance from the national grid, income, what have you. Now you actually need to go and visit those communities. And so you're going to look at the community, you're going to talk to the officials, get to know the social structures, you're going to get to make sure that the data that you used when you were screening for communities seems reasonable. You might do focus groups and surveys and try to understand how sunny it is or how windy it is, etc. So now you're investing time in these communities. You've traveled there, you're collecting data, and as much as I'd like to say that every community that I've walked into could make use of an off-grid system. That's not the truth. Many of these communities will not be able to support an off-grid system for a number of reasons, some of which is financial, but they also might lack an organizational structure that could manage the system. Or you might be worried about theft or vandalism, and so you might pass them over. So based upon all the data that you have, you take that short list of communities and you prioritize them based upon what your organization is trying to do. Are you trying to positively impact people? Are you going to work exclusively in schools or hospitals? Are you trying to make money? And there's lots of ways of ranking these communities. And here are just a couple of frameworks that you might use together or independently to come up with the candidates, the ones that are you think the off-grid system has the best chance of being successful. So some of the things that you look for are communities where the national grid isn't going to be extended to, because if you invest in building an off-grid system and then the grid happens to come there, you've probably wasted a lot of time and money. You also want to make sure that there's not any competition. You want to make sure that the people want the electricity, and how they tell you that they're going to use it, you think impacts their quality of life or impacts the economy positively. You want to make sure that people can pay for electricity. Oftentimes they can't, and you need to be aware of that. It needs to be sunny or windy or have a good hydro resource or something that there has to be energy there that you can use to power your grid. Generally speaking, you like the population to be dense. If people are scattered all over the place, you're going to spend a lot of money bringing power lines to them. You need to have roads there. A cell network is helpful for checking in remotely and maintaining the system. You want the community to be politically stable, and you also want there to be a lot of goodwill towards the project. So low risk of theft and vandalism. So these are the things that you should be looking for. We then move to step 4, where you actually design the system. And most of the time you do the technical design as well as the business design at the same time. Trying to decide how big of a system to make, what's the impact of the capital and operating costs on the tariff for electricity and so forth. So there's lots of different ways that you can conceptualize the economics of it. The upfront expense, the operating expense, etc. But the whole idea here is that these two should be jointly done, and it will be iterative. You don't just design one system and always use it. It should be customized to the community. And there's lots of ways of designing the system, which I'm not going to get into detail here, but there are computer programs like Homer, which let you do it fairly easily, provided you have good input information. Now, once you've done that design and the business plan makes sense for you, then you start implementing the system. So this would involve maybe getting permits, identifying who will be doing the installation, procuring equipment, talking with the local community to identify who the users will be, and explaining to them how what their experience will be like. It's very, very rare for a mini grid to power everyone's house in a community. That is very, very rare. Instead, you're going to be doing some subset of the community because it's going to be too expensive to power everyone. And then finally, you install the system, and this can go quite quickly, maybe just a few days, and then you make sure the system is working properly. Now the system is operating, it's serving users, and so you are maintaining it, repairing it, collecting information about its performance, how people have responded to it, are their lives being improved, and so on. And then after it's been operating, at some point you need to decide if you're going to expand or enhance it, serving more people or serving them better, or retire it. And really you should be thinking about how you're going to manage retiring the system before you install it, because you don't want to leave hazardous batteries and components out there. You want to have a plan to restore the community to the way you found it. If for whatever reason the mini grid isn't going to work, or the electrical system isn't going to work in the long run. And so I strongly encourage you to think about this ahead of time. Figure out how you're going to get the batteries out of there when they fail, because lead acid batteries can be extremely harmful if you leave them in the community. We've actually retired a system because the grid eventually made it to the community, and so we recycled all the lead acid batteries that were there. Okay, I'm going to close here just by talking about some of my experiences with Kilowatts for Humanity. And what we try to do is we try to improve people's lives by providing access to electricity and fostering the development of sustainable businesses. And so that's important because we see electricity access as enabling sustainable business. We want to have an impact on that community's ability to thrive and earn money. So we always work with partners that are in the country and communities that we're involved in. And they're the ones that know the communities well. They own the systems. We don't. We give it to them. We find that the communities will come up with a variety of ways to use electricity, from charging cell phones for a small fee, powering using solar home systems to power people's homes, making ice to cool and preserve fish, selling cold beverages, showing movies, incubating chicken eggs, barber shops, small stores, sewing machines. The list goes on and on and on. And so the whole idea is that some of the revenue that the system makes from offering these services goes back into expanding the services or paying for repair and maintenance. So the most recent community that we are involved in is called Kinchomba, and it's in Zambia. And the local organization is an organization of young adults, about 40 of them. And we met with them, and they gave us ideas for what they want to do for the economic activities with the electricity. And so we worked to design a system for them that is about 5 kilowatts in size, with a large battery bank, and powers fans, freezers, barber shop and hair salon, chicken incubator, charges cell phones, and also powers lighting within and outside the kiosk. So several businesses then will get powered by it. And we work with the community. They make the bricks in the community. So they have they're showing us their commitment and enthusiasm by building the kiosk itself. We have the designs professionally done, and then they implement it. So this is what it looks like in near finished state over here. And that's what the original idea was. We always hire local companies, Zambian companies, to do the installation. Because of COVID, my organization, we didn't go to Zambia at all. This was all done by Zambians. And I think that's a really powerful thing, is that it wasn't done by Americans, it was done by Zambians. We helped raise money and do the design, but they did everything else. And so this is a system that you see over here. Here are the lithium-ion batteries. This is the inverter. And this is the team that did the installation there. So to close out, let me just remind you that about 1 billion people don't have access to electricity. That's the bad news. The good news is that there are technologies now that are out there that make providing electricity to these communities viable. And it seems especially important to make use of that electricity in a way that is productive. Powering refrigerators or water pumps or sewing machines. And then also that engagement with the local community is extremely important, and it can lead to a successful program. And let me end with just a quick story. So if you spend time in rural villages, especially around children, you'll see that they love to have their picture taken with mobile phones. I don't think they see their own picture very often, and so this is quite a treat for them. And it's a nice experience. You gather around, you take the picture, and you show the picture to the children on your phone, and that's it. But I always felt that I wish I could do more. Rather than just show them a picture on my phone, I want to actually give them a picture. So I spent a lot of time researching a way where I could take a picture with my cell phone and then print it out right there on demand with like a printer that would fit in my pocket, a Bluetooth connected printer. And I was able to do that. I found one, I imported it from South Korea, and the next time I went to, this was Kenya, I brought it with me. And I was with a colleague, and we had a bunch of kids come running up to us, and we took this picture. And as we were waiting for the picture to print, I looked at my colleague Peter, and I said, which kid should we give the picture to? And he said, give it to the kid in the green shirt because he has the best smile. And so we waited for a minute or two, and after the printer, the photo was done, I took it out and I gave it to the kid in the green shirt. And then what happened? Well, all the other kids started beating up the kid in the green shirt because they wanted that picture. They all wanted it, and I only had one to give. So Peter and I pulled the picture out of the kid's hand, and I actually keep it on my desk here. It's all torn up as a reminder that it's not just the technology. I mean, I had exactly the right technology for this situation. I knew it had to connect to my phone via Bluetooth, and I knew it had to fit in my pocket and print it out in, just a minute or two. So I had the technology right, but I failed to anticipate the social characteristics of that situation. Of course, these other kids are going to want to see the printed picture. Of course they will. And it's reasonable to believe that they would have, or at least to anticipate that they would have acted violently. Now, the kid in the green shirt was fine. He was fine. It was kids just being rough with each other. But it taught me that lesson, that the technology isn't everything. Think about how it's going to be used. Think about the benefit and the harm. So what I decided to do to learn from this is now I only do family portraits, and I only give the picture then to the mother because nobody messes with the mother. So with that, thank you so much for your attention. Here's my contact information, and I'm more than happy to answer whatever questions you may have.
Very, very interesting. Thank you, Professor Henry Louis. Very, very interesting. And with that story at the end, that's happened. And let me tell you that we have some people here. Let's say some, but we in Colombia, maybe 2 million people without access to the electricity, to the electric grid. We call it non-interconnected zones. There's a lot of people working to develop projects there. And first, I also want to thank you for the information. Really, I really appreciate it. Full of data and technical and social and electricity aspect, global aspect. Very, very interesting. I'm going to tell you some questions that people has done during the webinar. Victor says kilowatts for humanity will have the availability to work in Latin America?
Great question. We focus on Zambia in particular. And one of the reasons why is anytime you switch to a new community or country, you have to learn a lot about that community and country. And there are maybe 8 or 9 million people in Zambia that still don't have electricity. So our job there isn't done. And so we think that we can be more effective and efficient sticking to the countries that we know well. But I would certainly encourage anyone to replicate our model on how we do things, and maybe Colombia, you could be the kilowatts for humanity of Colombia.
Colombia section.
To work there and found a similar organization and do it. We always like to share our experiences. Yeah.
A franchise. Okay, Victor. So you are invited to work.
Could I do a question?
Do it, please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Yuri. Professor Henry, how are you? So I have a question about batteries, because we try to use car batteries for an implementation like you made. So my question is, car batteries are usable for this purpose, or are not?
No, car batteries. You'll find that the lifetime of a car battery used for an off-grid program will be very, very short. Car batteries are designed to provide a high amount of current for a very short period of time. For example, when you start your car, right? That's primarily what they're used for, starting the car. They're not designed to be deeply discharged and recharged on a regular basis. So you can think of it as a car battery is sort of like somebody who runs the 100 meters, right? They're Usain Bolt, right? They're designed to go really, really fast for a short period of time. Whereas for an off-grid system, you want somebody who runs the marathon. They can be discharged overnight at maybe a slower pace, but they can do it for a long time. And that's how the batteries are physically designed differently. Even though they're same lead-acid batteries, they're physically designed to provide current really quickly, like in a car battery, or deeply discharged day after day after day, like you would see in what you might call a solar battery. So don't use. I would recommend not using car batteries. They're probably cheaper, but they won't last nearly as long as what we call a deep cycle lead-acid battery or a solar battery.
Okay, but there is a way to modify them. So because in that community they have the materials, but is there a way to modify these batteries, or is not?
So you can use them. I mean, they will output 12 volts or 24 volts or whatever, depending on how you connect them. But I'm telling you, they won't last as long. They won't last as, you'll have to replace them faster. I would also really discourage modifying lead-acid batteries, particularly in the communities. Lead is poisonous, and you have little kids in these communities. And even if you try to be careful, that lead will find its way into households and around those kids. So I would really discourage trying to modify lead-acid batteries in the community. Now, if you have a lab or a safer place where you can control the environment and make sure nobody is, that lead doesn't get spilled or the acid doesn't get spilled, then maybe. But I would really think that you're better off getting batteries that are designed to be used in off-grid solar rather than trying to repurpose or reuse automotive batteries.
Thank you, Professor.
Okay, we have another question from Joanna Castellanos. She says, which ones has been the most difficult or the bigger difficult implementing those off-grid solutions with the communities?
Yeah, for as many successes as we've had failures as well, or ones that don't work well. There's I think identifying the community is the biggest problem. Okay, so the places where we haven't been successful, it wasn't a good fit for the community. The community maybe wasn't able to afford or value the electricity in a way that we anticipated, or the partner that we worked with really wasn't as committed to that community as we thought they were. Because it's not like you just install one of these systems and walk away. There needs to be somebody who is making sure that the electricity is being used in a productive way, that if there's a problem, that it's promptly reported, that there's an entrepreneurial side of it, where if maybe the barber shop is not making enough money, maybe do something else with the electricity. And so some communities are more organized than others, and some partners are better at supporting these programs than others as well. So really getting to know the community has been important. We had one example where we went into this community and we trained the person operating the system, the person that was running the small business, and it turns out that person ended up just stealing a bunch of the money and leaving the community. And then we didn't have anybody trained to know how to take their place. That was an early failure for us. So now we train our partner so that they can train anyone, and they know the community and can better identify, the more trustworthy people than we ever could.
Okay, good. There's another one, also from Joanna Castellanos. How has been the answer of the communities in sustainability issues, maintenance, technologies replacement, considerations when the life cycle is done, and that?
Yeah, so we're just now entering for our early systems. The batteries are becoming old and needing replacement. The communities, I think, do a good job with maintaining the system, but also it's because we design our systems to be as low maintenance as possible. Okay, so more or less all the community has to do is clean off the solar panels and notice if there's anything irregular. We don't anymore use batteries that require maintenance, and we have a lot of things that are automated, and we do actually get to look at the data remotely from the United States, so we can kind of monitor it. Now, I won't lie to you, it is extremely hard for these communities to exert the financial and business discipline to save money over multiple years to replace batteries. Batteries are expensive, thousands of dollars, which is a lot of money for these local communities. So we understand this. We come up with a plan that we think will be successful, but we always know that there's a very realistic probability and possibility that something will fail before they have money saved up, or they invested the money in something else. And so we always, whenever we raise money, we keep a portion of it aside to replace batteries if our partners aren't able to.
Okay, thanks. There's another question from Miguel Figueroa. Miguel is from Tegucigalpa, Honduras. Question, would you consider that electrification is strictly must be associated with a productive activity, or is a human right? Greetings from Tegucigalpa, Honduras.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's a lot of nuance to that. So you could say that access to electricity is a human right, and I think that to really have a fulfilled life, you need to have energy that enables you to be productive, to be able to socialize at night, do all these things. The problem is in the actual ability to implement that human right, or to protect that human right. If you're a country like Zambia, you have so many challenges. so many challenges: external debt, healthcare, education, roads, corruption. Is access to electricity the number one priority? I don't know. And I think you could argue that health or education is probably more important. So it's hard to say that this would be the number one thing that government should invest in. I think it can show a return on investment. However, I think if done correctly, you can really enable these communities to contribute more to your tax base, and it supports health and education and all these other great outcomes. But I wouldn't say that it is unequivocally the most important and urgent need that many of these developing countries face.
Sadly.
Yeah, sadly. I mean, if it's not so much the case that the government is choosing not to do it maliciously. It's there's so many priorities. What do you do? What do you do first? And so many of these things have to happen together and simultaneously that it makes it even more challenging. Just providing electricity in and of itself doesn't work. It has to go with healthcare, education, economy. All these things need to happen together.
I take advantage of that. You said the last thing you said, and there's no more questions in the chat window. And in that case in Kachomba, Zambia, where people were working to build to make the construction, it was very interesting, and also people get involved in a project that they for the sustainability that's very important. They know that is for them, empower them to develop more things. You told us that there was some business there, a barber shop, a grocery shop. Why not a health center or a clinic center or I don't know, a room for a school or a community center or something like that? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think it really depends upon your organization's mission, right? So there are organizations that what they do is they provide electricity to health clinics. They provide electricity to schools. We obviously see the value in that, but we also need to make sure that there is a way of recuperating the investment in that electrical system. So you spend thousands of dollars to make your system bigger to supply electricity to, say, a health clinic, right? It's going to cost thousands and thousands of dollars if the health clinic isn't right there. So what's going to happen when now you have even more batteries that need to be replaced? Is that health clinic going to pay you? I mean, in many cases, they're run by the government, and it becomes another layer of bureaucracy that you have to work through. Now, there are some of our systems where we do provide electricity to, a school or something like that as a community benefit, and we understand, the community tells us it's very important to us that we have a light here, and so we'll try to accommodate that, but sort of under the understanding that this is going to make the project more successful, in its entirety. Like, it's really important. So we don't, we focus on the business, the economic part of it, the productive use part of it, and not so much on the others. We would absolutely welcome other organizations that focus on those things to do it, but they're inherently going to have a different model than we will, because they're going to be installing it knowing that they're probably not going to make money, or the local partner is not going to make money from the government on installing a solar system in a school, right? So they're going to have a totally different fundraising model than we do, and a different, yeah.
Okay, so in terms of making a kind of resume, a conclusion could be that basically productive uses of electricity would be a way to improve communities' incomes and communities' empowerment.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Yeah.
Actually, I
Sí.
want to work. I have one question for Henry.
Yeah. Yes, Sergio, do it.
Hey, Henry, thank you so much for the presentation. The effort that you are making for the poor people in Africa is very reasonable. Congratulations for that. I had two questions. The first one is with regard the funds. I mean, when you see the funds for invested in the project for someone entity, for a third entity, or you charge all the project to the community? And second,
Okay.
this kind of projects.
Let me answer the first question so I don't forget it, and then we can move on. So I think your question was about the funds that are required for the installation. Yeah. So we operate as a nonprofit organization. And what that means for us is that we write grant proposals and we solicit donors to give us money. We take that money and we use it to basically buy the system, pay for its installation, and so forth. We turn it over, the asset over to our partner or the community, depending on the arrangement, and it's theirs. They own it. We no longer have any financial stake in it, and so that's how we operate as an organization. So if we don't raise money, we can't do projects. We can't do programs. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. The second question is more regarding the the lead time. You are going to recover this kind of investment for the community. Around 3 or 4 or 5, 6 years to recover the investment. How much is the time for these typical projects?
I had a hard time hearing that one. I heard something about how much is something, but I'm not sure. Maybe if you type it in, maybe we'll have better luck.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was quite difficult. There's some difficulties on the sound.
Yeah.
¿Estás escribiéndole, Sergio? I guess he's writing.
Okay. Yeah.
Let's wait for a minute. Return of investment. What's the return of investment that you consider in your projects?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I wish I had a better answer for you than what I'm going to say. Because we donate the equipment, we don't really track the return on it. I mean, to us, it's just a cost. Now, I'll tell you that in the communities that we're involved in, they're able to generate thousands and thousands of US dollar equivalent in revenue every year. I mean, so they can do quite well. But it depends community to community. Yeah, but it's on the order of thousands of dollars, maybe $10,000 if it's especially big one. The surveys that we do after installations show that some community, the majority of people in that community visit the kiosk for services multiple times a week, and that we're talking, hundreds or even a few thousand people are in that area that visit the kiosk and do some sort of transaction there. So it's hard to know for certain because you might imagine keeping really accurate records of the financial transactions is not customary there. So we often ask, but we get information back to us that maybe isn't too low of a quality for us to draw a lot of strict conclusions. We know that if the kiosk is up and operating and it's being used, that it has to be making money because otherwise they would have shut it down, naturally.
Okay, thanks. I guess, there's no more questions, so I guess it's done, and I would like to thanks everyone for being here, join us in this conference and webinar, Thank you, Dr. Henry Louis, for joining us this night here in Colombia and this afternoon in Seattle and other countries. Thank you very much for being with us. Gracias a todos por acompañarnos. Recuerden que esta es un webinar de IEEE Power and Energy Society. Dentro de IEEE los invitamos a ser parte de esta sociedad. Dr. Henry Louis, thank you very much. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Best of luck and stay healthy, everyone.
Thank you. Same. Gracias a todos. Una muy buena noche para todos.